The first time Sierra Vane saw the black wolf, it was drowning. Not literally, wolves did not drown in shallow forest streams, but it lay half-submerged in the icy current of the Vel River, one enormous paw twisted at a wrong angle, silver-tipped fur. Matted dark with blood and mud. The rain had been falling for 3 days without stopping, and the forest beyond the Empire's eastern wall smelled of iron and rot. Sierra should not have been there. She was a record keeper, assigned to the lower palace vaults, a woman whose entire existence had been reduced to ink, dust, and the careful avoidance of anyone who might recognize her face. 2 years earlier, she had possessed a different life entirely. A betrothal, a name worth speaking aloud at noble gatherings, a future measured in silk and ceremony. Then Lord Evander Crest had looked at her across a candle-lit hall and said, quietly and completely without cruelty, which somehow made it worse, "You are not what the Crest bloodline requires." 8 words. That was all it had taken to unmake her. Now she stood at the river's edge in borrowed boots that were too large, clutching a basket of medicinal bark she had gathered for the palace infirmary, staring at a creature that had no business being alive. The wolf lifted its head. Its eyes were not animal eyes. They burned a deep, fractured amber, the color of old embers, and inside them was something that Sierra recognized immediately and wished she didn't. Exhaustion that had gone on too long. She should have kept walking. Instead, she set down her basket and crouched at the river's edge. The wolf did not trust her. She had not expected it to. It growled when she came too close, snapped when she reached for the twisted leg, and twice tried to stand and flee despite the obvious impossibility of bearing weight on the shattered bone. Each attempt ended the same way, a collapse into the mud, more blood, more rain, more pain. Sierra sat back and waited. She had learned patience the way most exiled women did out of necessity. When you became invisible, you stopped having the luxury of urgency. The world moved around you regardless, so you learned to sit quietly and watch it move. "You can bite me if you need to," she told the wolf conversationally. "I've had worse." The amber eyes fixed on her face. Something shifted faintly in them, not trust exactly, but a pause in the hostility. Curiosity, perhaps, or simply the recognition that she was not, currently, trying to kill it. Sierra reached into her basket, slow and careful, and withdrew a length of linen bandage she had intended for a palace cook's burned hand. She was going to hear about that later. "The bone needs setting before I wrap it," she said. "It will hurt. I am going to do it anyway because if I don't, you'll never use the leg again and something will eat you within a week. So I need you to hold very still and not kill me." A long silence stretched between them, filled only with rain. Then the wolf lowered its massive head back into the mud. Permission. Sierra's hands shook through the entire process, but she did not stop. She came back. She told herself it was to check the bandages. That was a reasonable medical reason with no embarrassing emotional component whatsoever. She came back 7 more times after that. By the 9th night, the wolf was waiting for her at the forest's edge before she reached it. Standing on all 4 legs now, the injured one still slightly favored but bearing weight, amber eyes catching the moonlight through the trees. Something bright and painful moved through Sierra's chest when she saw it standing upright. "You're walking," she said. The wolf huffed softly. The sound was distinctly, absurdly, like exasperation. Sierra laughed before she could stop herself. A small sound, rusty from disuse. She pressed her fingers against her mouth immediately afterward, surprised by it. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed alone. She sat beside the wolf that night with her back against an old oak tree and her knees tucked to her chest, while the creature settled beside her, enormous and warm, and radiating a heat that the cold forest badly needed. Slowly, by increments, its heavy head descended onto her lap. Sierra's breath caught. She did not move. The wolf's eyes closed. Trust, complete and absolute, offered without negotiation or condition. Nobody had trusted her that simply in 2 years. It hit her in the sternum like a stone. "You shouldn't do this," she whispered after a while. "Trust people so easily, they will let you down." The wolf made a low sound against her knees. It felt impossibly like disagreement. I am serious, Sira said softly. I am the worst person to trust. I am nobody. I live in a basement, and I steal bandages from the infirmary, and I will probably be dismissed from my position within the month, because I keep missing curfew to come and sit in a forest with a wolf. She looked down at the creature's massive, scarred head. And I would do it again, she admitted quietly. Every single time. The wolf opened one amber eye and looked at her. Something moved across its expression that was not entirely animal. Sira did not attend the imperial reclaiming ceremony. She had not been invited, obviously, and even if she had been, she would not have gone. The ceremony belonged to a world she had been removed from, the glittering, calculated world of noble bloodlines, and carefully arranged destinies and women who knew how to walk across marble floors without looking like they were apologizing for their own footsteps. She was in the lower vault when the distant music began above her. She could hear it faintly through the stone, celebratory horns, the stamp of formal processions, the low roar of an assembled court. Emperor Dorian Vale had returned from the Northern Wars. 7 years of absence. The Empire had been waiting for him with all the patience of a held breath. Sira pulled another archive box from the shelf and tried very hard not to think about the wolf, who she had not seen in 3 days, and who she was definitely not worried about. Then the vault door opened. Then chaos poured in behind it. It's in the palace, the sacred beast. It walked through the ceremony hall. It ignored everyone. Nobody can stop it. Sira was already moving before she knew why. The wolf stood in the corridor outside the vault entrance. Enormous. Scarred. Amber eyes burning through the chaos of shouting guards and fleeing servants like twin flames in deep water, looking directly at her. Blood stained the bandage still wrapped around its left foreleg. It had walked through the entire imperial palace on an injury that should have kept it lying down for another week. You absolute idiot, Sira breathed. Your leg! The wolf crossed the corridor in 4 strides and pressed its massive head against her shoulder. The entire world stopped. Behind the wolf, spilling down the staircase with all the stunned incomprehension of a court whose carefully constructed evening had just collapsed entirely, stood the emperor of the Varath Empire. Dorian Vale was not what she had expected. He was younger than the portrait suggested. Sharper. Carved by 7 years of war into something less ceremonial and more essential. A man who had survived rather than merely ruled. His gray eyes moved from the wolf, to the bandage on its leg, to Sira's ink-stained hands, to the torn hem of her robe where she had evidently used a strip of it for a previous dressing. Understanding arrived in his expression like a key turning in a lock. You treated it, he said. Not an accusation, not a question. Something quieter, a man recalibrating everything he had prepared to say. Sira straightened instinctively. It was injured. How long? 9 nights. Something moved across the court behind him. Gasps, whispers. The High Chancellor's face cycling through disbelief, horror, and political catastrophe in rapid succession. Dorian did not look at any of them. He was still looking at her. Your name, he said. Sira's chin lifted slightly. Old reflex, the instinct to shrink had been trained into her by 2 years of exile, but something older than that refused to disappear entirely. Sira Vane, she said. He recognized the name. She watched him recognize it, the slight shift of his eyes as the story attached itself to the surname. The crest rejection, the disgraced record keeper. The woman nobody was supposed to acknowledge in polite company. The wolf made a low sound and pressed more firmly against her side. Dorian looked at it, then back at her. I see, he said carefully. The ceremony is still waiting, Majesty, the High Chancellor said from somewhere behind him, strained and urgent. Dorian was quiet for a long moment. The wolf rumbled with distinct displeasure at the interruption. Clear the corridor, the Emperor said. Then, more quietly, only for her. I owe you a debt, Sira Vane. The sacred wolf has not allowed anyone near it in 30 years. Sira looked at the creature pressed warmly against her side. It just needed someone who wasn't trying to use it for something. The silence after those words lasted several seconds. Then Dorian said, with the expression of a man encountering something he had not prepared for and did not yet know how to name. Yes, I imagine it did. The chambers they gave her had a window. One window. Small, set high in the eastern wall, offering a narrow rectangle of night sky above the palace gardens. Sierra stood in front of it for a very long time after the servants left, just looking at it. In the vault, there had been no windows at all. The wolf lay across the threshold of the room like a living seal, amber eyes half closed, breathing steady. It had refused to leave. 3 palace guards had attempted to persuade it. The wolf had communicated its opinion of this suggestion with impressive clarity and no bloodshed, which Sierra chose to view as progress. A knock at the door. "It is the Emperor," Dorian said from outside. The wolf opened one eye, assessed the situation, and closed it again. Permission. He entered alone. No guards, no advisors, no ceremony. He was still wearing the formal black of the choosing ceremony, but he had removed the decorative elements somewhere between the corridor and here. The gold clasps, the imperial chain, the things that made him look like a portrait rather than a person. He looked tired. "You haven't eaten," he said, noting the untouched tray near the window. "I wasn't hungry. The healers say the wolf's leg is healing well. I know, I checked." A pause. He was watching her with the careful attention of someone trying to understand something that kept refusing to resolve into a simple shape. "You are frightened," he said. Sierra opened her mouth to deny it. "Not of me," he added, "or the wolf of this." He gestured slightly at the room, at the window, at all of it, of being somewhere that matters. The accuracy of it struck her like cold water. She looked away. "The last time I was somewhere that mattered," she said quietly, "I was told I wasn't sufficient." For it, Dorian was silent for a moment. Then he crossed to the other end of the room and turned to face the window with his back partially toward her. A deliberate choice, she realized, giving her space without leaving it. "I was told," he said to the glass, before the Northern campaign, that the Empire required an emperor who prioritized strategy above feeling. That sentiment was a liability in wartime. A pause. They were not entirely wrong, and entirely wrong simultaneously. Sierra looked at the back of his head. "What did you miss most?" she asked quietly. "During the wars." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, simple things, the kind people don't think are worth mentioning. The wolf exhaled softly in the doorway. And somewhere during that first strange quiet hour, Sierra Vane began the terrifying process of learning that kindness given without expectation was not a trap. It was simply kindness. That the walls she had built were not wrong. They had kept her alive. But they no longer needed to be permanent. That being seen by someone who wasn't looking for anything in particular was the most dangerous feeling in the world. And that she had apparently survived worse. The first threat came written in pale ink on a white card left beneath her breakfast tray. "Leave the palace, or we take the wolf." Sierra read it twice, folded it precisely, and went to find Dorian. She had expected fear. Instead, she felt a cold, focused clarity, the same sensation she had felt at the river's edge, kneeling in the mud while a wolf decided whether to trust her. Some things were worth the risk. The wolf walked beside her through the palace corridors. Servants pressed against the walls. Guards stepped aside. The creature's amber eyes burned steady in the morning light, unbothered by grandeur or threat, concerned only with the person beside it. This, Sierra thought, is what protection feels like when it isn't also control. She found the Emperor in the War Council room, surrounded by maps and advisors. He looked up when she entered and immediately read her expression. "Clear the room," he said. They found the source within a day. An old noble house running out of relevance, deciding that removing the irregularity, Sierra, would restore the expected order of things, as though she were an error that could be corrected with sufficient pressure. She had spent 2 years believing she was exactly that. She had spent 9 nights in a forest learning otherwise. When the confrontation came, and it did, as confrontations in old empires always do, in a cold stone room beneath the palace with people who had convinced themselves that cruelty was merely pragmatism. Sierra stood with the wolf on one side and Dorian on the other. Not behind him, beside him. The difference mattered. "You want to remove me," she said to the man across the chamber, "because I am inconvenient, because I don't come from the right family or carry the right name or conform to the right shape." Lord Hadron Voss looked at her with the polished contempt of a man who had never once doubted his own importance. "You are nobody," he said. Sierra looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what you thought about the wolf before it chose." The wolf stepped forward. Voss stepped back. "Love is not weakness," Sierra said quietly. "Cruelty is not strength, and the things you've spent your life trying to own will always know the difference." The eastern gardens smelled of rain-wet grass and wood smoke, and something sweet from the kitchen windows 3 floors above. Sierra sat on the low garden wall with her shoes off and her feet in the grass, a stack of unread reports beside her that she was absolutely going to read in a moment. The wolf lay in a patch of late afternoon sunlight nearby, enormous and magnificent and deeply, contentedly. Asleep, footsteps on the stone path. "You're avoiding the Eastern Council meeting," Dorian said, settling beside her. "I finished my part of it. Harlow can manage the rest. He'll complain. He always complains." Sierra tilted her face toward the sun. "That's how I know things are." "Going well." Dorian was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're staring at the wolf again. He has a piece of bark in his fur and won't let me remove it. He's asleep. He's pretending." As if in confirmation, the wolf's ear twitched. Otherwise, it did not move. Dorian's hand found hers on the wall between them. Easy now, the way it had taken almost a full year to become easy, not because they were slow, but because Sierra had needed that year to stop waiting for the part where it stopped. It had not stopped. She looked at him sideways. "Do you ever think," she said, "about what would have happened if I had kept walking that night?" "Yes," he said. And I am profoundly grateful you are the kind of person who doesn't." The wolf opened one amber eye, regarded them both with the dignified satisfaction of a creature whose work was thoroughly complete, and went back to sleep. Sierra leaned her head against Dorian's shoulder. Above them, swifts cut quick arcs across the pale sky. The garden smelled of rain and grass. And home, a word that had once felt like a room she was standing outside of, pressing her face against the glass. She was inside now. She had been chosen in the end, not because she was perfect, and not because she was powerful, but because in a cold forest in the rain she had looked at a wounded thing and stayed. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that is enough to change everything. The end.